This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Atlanta Football Party, your home for Atlanta football, Falcons talk. It's your local insight that you can't get anywhere else but right here on Locked On. And we want to thank all of our everydayers that make the Atlanta Football Party your first listen. And of course, you can become an everydayer by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest Atlanta Football Party as soon as it is available. I am, of course, your host, Aaron Freeman, the humble host of Locked On Falcons, and I'm joined today by 11 Alive anchor Maria Martin and the man, the myth, the legend, D. Orlando Ledbetter, Atlanta Falcons reporter for the AJC. Jarvis and Tanitra are out today, but while the teachers are away, the kids will play. And speaking of playing, Falcons will be playing the majority of their primetime games in the red helmets. And of course, since we have D-Led here, we got to get him to weigh in on that. And we'll also weigh in on some breakout candidates for the Falcons this year, as well as whether we're putting too much pressure on the rookies to create pressure this season. But first, it is still list season coming to a close, but it's not quite over. Drake London debuted at number 97 on the NFL's Top 100 2 weeks ago and number 88 on the most recent Locked On NFL Top 100 this past week. But ESPN's Jeremy Fowler surveyed NFL execs, coaches, and scouts to rank the top 10 wide receivers on Wednesday. And while 16 receivers received at least one top 10 vote, Drake London was not among them. Maria, I want to come to you first. How big is this snub, especially coming from the people that are allegedly know the league the best?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a snub for Drake, but I think as we've talked about before on this podcast, this is what happens to Falcons players, right? They always get underappreciated nationally by people who do know football really well. I'm not going to say know football the best, but that they do know football really well. It's just when you're talking about receivers like Drake London, who has had a carousel at quarterback. He had Kirk for a while, and we thought that that was going to work out to be a lot longer, and then they switched to Penix. You know, he hasn't truly, I think, shown what Drake is capable of because of the inconsistencies at quarterback. But he took a massive step forward when Kirk Cousins was the quarterback. And if you remember, whenever they did change to Micah Penix Jr., Drake was clearly a little bit frustrated with the whole thing because he felt like he had finally found his quarterback, a veteran who could actually get him the football and turn him into what we all know and love Drake to be, which we also saw glimpses of that at USC, right? And I think that last year was just a taste of what Drake is actually capable of. I do know that he is going to be very deserving of a monster contract here very soon, which I know we're going to get into. But, you know, for that to be the narrative that Drake doesn't get the national recognition is very frustrating because although when you talk about a Garrett Wilson who's had 3 straight 1,000 receiving yards, Drake didn't have that. His first was last year. I do believe a whole majority of that is a credit to the rotation at quarterback, the inconsistencies at that position for Drake. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a step for him. I think he should get more recognition. I've thought that for a while. But again, the numbers aren't truly there like some of the other wide receivers in the league quite yet.
D-Led, what say you on Drake maybe not getting the recognition that some people, including Maria, clearly thinks he deserves?
Yeah, no doubt. The recognition comes when you start winning football games, when the team starts winning. He's been on 2 7-10 teams and an 8-9 team, had a monster 100-catch, 1,000-yard season last year. Kind of put him on the radar. Now people at least talking about him. I was tracking him and Garrett Wilson from the very beginning because I thought if you were taking wide receiver, Wilson was rated a little bit higher. He's been able to produce no matter the quarterbacks that have been there. Trevor Siemian, it was just a whole slew of Zach Wilson. He got his 1,000 yards, still with the Jets. So. Drake, you can't. He even says that, hey, don't tell me based on what quarterback. I don't care who's playing quarterback. I'm going to get mine. But he broke through last year. He's at least on the radar, and and they start winning. That's when the recognition comes for the Falcons. That's just how it's been throughout the years. If they're 7-8, 4-12, you got to pretty much have a monster season way off the charts to get any kind of recognition.
Yeah, I think you guys both nailed it with the team success leading to greater individual success, or at least individual recognition. I think that's been pretty consistently a theme when we talk about some of the Falcons' top players who are, I think, universally recognized as very good, but may not necessarily be recognized as some of the best in the league, just because typically that is associated to the best teams in the league. And you watch a player like AJ Brown, who was very successful in Tennessee, and then go to the Philadelphia Eagles the last couple of years, and suddenly is now recognized as one of the top 3 or 4 wide receivers in the NFL, when he probably wasn't getting that quite accolades in Tennessee. And so I think the same potentially follows for Drake. The one thing I will say in relation to Garrett Wilson, you're right that Garrett Wilson has been putting up consistent 1,000-yard seasons, but I think some of the things that have helped Garrett Wilson do that is because of how bad the Jets have been the last couple of years, and they have to kind of throw the ball a bunch more. And the Falcons obviously have not been a great team the last couple of years, but particularly in Drake's first 2 years, they were very much geared around running the football. And so I do think that put a limit on how many opportunities Drake had in those first 2 years to just, rack up monster numbers. And you even saw it late in that 2022 season when Kyle Pitts got injured, when the Falcons had to kind of force feed the ball to Drake London. You saw him sort of respond in a positive way. So I think this upcoming season is going to be a big year for not only Drake London, but the team as a whole, because this is kind of the year where, and we've been saying this the last several years, but this is the year where we need the Falcons to kind of break through and become that winning team. And particularly when it comes to Drake London, as you guys have mentioned, Garrett Wilson, player that just got a massive 4-year contract extension worth $130 million with $90 million guaranteed. As you've mentioned, Wilson was one of 6 wide receivers taken in the first round in that 2022 NFL draft. And he's now the first one of those 6 to receive his second contract. And of course, Drake London was also one of those 6 and was the first one taken off the board. And sort of getting to that conversation about Drake's potential financial future, now that kind of Garrett Wilson has set the market, do you feel like it's more likely to be the floor or the ceiling for the potential extension in the future for Drake London? And D-Led, I guess you can answer this first.
Yes, I 132. It's I don't know if that's the floor or the ceiling, but you beat the contract. You drafted him drafting 3 spots ahead of him. Well, 10 and 8. So you just beat that contract. Don't let anybody else come in higher. But the Falcons are strapped; they can't do anything. And I texted his agent. Well, I emailed him and texted Mr. Kessler, Athletes First, and he was like, "Hey, you didn't have to text and email me. I checked both." And so I was like, "Hey, have y'all had any talks yet?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "The answer to your question was no." So they can't really do anything till next August till you get $40 million in your backup quarterback, off the books or moved or something. So they got to kind of like say, "Hey, Drake, we love you. Keep playing. We got some, we got something for you, maybe Christmas time or something. Santa's gonna leave something under your tree, but right now, going out there and keep doing your thing, and good things come to those people that wait." But certainly, the more you get away from the Garrett contract, the ceiling gets higher. So, but they're not in a position to jump in there right now and do it unless they some magical. There's always salary cap moves you can make and so forth, but I don't really see where they can get that contract done and get it, on the books even down the road.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point, D-Lad, because I've seen some people suggest that maybe the Falcons should have a little bit more urgency, but I do think from a financial standpoint, it may not necessarily be feasible for the team to try to get out one of these potential max wide receiver contracts, given that they have, Kirk Cousins' contract on their books. They're going to have to figure out a way to sort of move that off their books in 2026, and that hopefully will open up some more opportunity to give out a sizable contract. But Maria, when you sort of hear that talking about the timeline for Drake's contract, And then when talking about the potential floor and ceiling for Drake, we've seen a lot of money go to wide receivers this offseason. Jamar Chase set the new mark for the highest paid, I think, non-quarterback on offense, because Myles Garrett's the highest paid non-quarterback on defense at like $40 million. And now Garrett Wilson is making $32.5 million. Are we expecting Drake's number eventually, when it gets done, to come in somewhere between that range? Or do you still feel like there's a lot more that Drake has to prove in order to be in that conversation for one of the highest paid wide receivers in the league?
Well, remember, we were having this conversation about running backs with Bijan Robinson as well. And when you watch a bunch of these guys around you get paid, they're going to start to wonder, where is mine? And for Drake, again, like I said earlier, I think it's warranted and it is coming. But to D-Led's point, there's not a lot of flexibility for the Falcons. There could be in the future, but right now, what they're dealing with is a backup quarterback that's incredibly expensive. And, that was the market for a veteran quarterback. That was the price you had to pay. And so they had to do that. And they thought that obviously Kirk was going to work out a lot longer than was intended. Just because he's on the roster right now, he is going to be there at training camp as QB2 behind Michael Penix Jr. doesn't mean that'll always be the case. And when you have a player like Drake London that is going to be a part of your future, or at least the Falcons hope so, you're going to have to get creative. With Kirk, that will move off of the books at one point in time or another. So in order to make Drake happy and in order to keep him here, they're going to have to pay him a lot of money. I thought that before the Garrett Wilson deal came in, and now Garrett Wilson really puts the fire to the Falcons in terms of a contract deal for Drake London. So right now, nothing can be done. D-Led's right about that. There is absolutely nothing the Falcons can do, and Drake's just going to have to continue to, as D-Led said, be who he is and continue to just work, and hopefully things will come his way. But Drake will get paid one way or another, whether it's by the Falcons or someone else. And I do believe the Falcons want to keep him there. So in order to make that happen, flexibility and patience will have to be Drake's best friend in that aspect.
Yeah. And this is all part of, hopefully a long-term plan for the Falcons that hopefully will start to come together this season with some more team success. Because when you look at, the potential contracts for Drake London, you can throw Kyle Pitts into the mix, although it doesn't look right now particularly optimistic that Kyle Pitts is going to get a second contract. But, hypothetically, it's a possibility that could come in the future. But you look at Drake's potential payday, you look at Bijan Robinson's potential payday, then you have Michael Penix's potential payday, and then we'll see with, James Pierce and Jalen Walker much further down the line. But you're going to have potentially, if these guys continue on the paths that they're all headed on, particularly with Drake and Bijan, where we can see the vision a little bit more clearer than we do right now with Michael Penix. You're going to have a lot of money wrapped up in your offense on some of these big max deals that we're seeing handed out to various players. And it's very similar to what we saw is sort of at the peak of the Matt Ryan era, when you had Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and all these other players that were getting paid a lot of money at that time. And, we saw that be successful for a time. But I think one of the reasons why it kind of fizzled out over time was the Falcons couldn't sustain it because they weren't necessarily going to draft. They weren't drafting as well as I think they needed to in order to sustain that success. Because when you have all these big contracts and a handful of players, you need to offset that with, quality players on sort of cheap rookie deals. And so obviously those are all issues that the Falcons and hurdles the Falcons going to have to cross in the future at this point in time. But I'm curious, before we turn the attention to those young players and James Pierce and Jalen Walker in our next segment, how optimistic are you guys that the Falcons can sort of piece that together in the years to come?
The big thing moving forward, there'll be three kind of pillars. Bijan, Drake, then you're gonna have to do Michael Penix. So you got 3 more years of him on his rookie contract. And also during that time, you're gonna have to rebuild the offensive line, because they're right up on the breaking point, which is the rule of 150. When you're the age of your linemen add up to 150, that's when you start rebuilding. And I did some research the other day. I think they're at 143. So you're like a couple years away. News is 27. That kind of throws it off with him being a rookie center, not a rookie, but a first-year starting center at 27. Jake's getting up there. So is Caleb. You got Bergeron and Lindstrom. So that's going to be the wild card there too. You're going to have to rebuild that line. And what failed them was their inability to hit in the draft. And then when they did hit in the draft, they couldn't sign him. Devondre Campbell, Foye Oluokun, the linebackers from Curtis Lofton from the previous regime. So if you do hit in the draft, you can't keep them. So you got to keep drafting well, and that is a model that hasn't been sustainable. But that's where we look to be heading again. And, I guess got to do better at drafting or developing players.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But when you look at these monster contracts, that's what I've been thinking about the last couple of minutes that we've been talking, is that there are a lot of guys coming up that are going to be on the hook for a lot of money. Bijan Robinson will be very deserving of a monster contract. Drake London and Michael Penix Jr. on down the road, we hope. Okay, there's no guarantee with him. We've only seen him in 3 games, but you don't draft a quarterback when you have an expensive quarterback like that if you don't think he's going to be a part of many years to come. So yeah, the Falcons do have to get creative within the next, let's say, 5 years in terms of these contracts. These are the core pieces to your offense that they've been working on and building. We know that defense has not been a priority in the first round until this year. And so they've been slowly building what they hope is many years to come on offense. And you've seen that pay dividends in 2 players in particular that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, which would be Bijan Robinson and Drake London. Tyler Algier will not be in the picture, I don't believe, because you're going to have to get rid of him when his contract is up. So then that frees up some money as well. Not enough to really go into what the scope of what we're talking about, but still, that does give you a little bit of wiggle room. And then the age of the offensive lineman is something we've talked about this show for a long time. These guys have been around, most of them, not all of them. These guys have been around for a long time. There's going to be a point in time where you're going to have to move things around, draft some offensive linemen, I think, in the future. And so, yeah, the Falcons are kind of in a weird spot when it comes to the next 2-3 years in their offense. But these are some guys you're going to have to pay a lot of freaking money, and the Falcons better be ready to do that.
Absolutely. So, talking about drafting and developing, the Falcons just drafted and hopefully are going to develop 2 first-round picks in James Pierce and Jalen Walker. But the question is, are we putting too much pressure on those rookies to generate pressure on opposing quarterbacks? And we'll talk about that in under further review. Now, of course, we all love summer sports, and just because the NBA season is over and the NFL season has yet to begin doesn't mean that FanDuel isn't giving you all the best way to get in all that summer action, whether it be baseball, soccer, golf, tennis, WNBA, NBA Summer League. It's all going strong. And since you're already following all that action, why not make it a little bit more thrilling with FanDuel? We're going to give you every opportunity to win, not only whether you're betting when Ronald Acuna hits his next homer, or if the Atlanta Dream can chase their way to the top of the Eastern Conference supremacy, or if you're looking ahead to the Falcon season because you believe Michael Penix is going to lead this team to paradise. It's all there for you at FanDuel. It's easy to use. They're fast to pay out. So what are you waiting for? All you have to do is open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bet if that first bet wins. Again, that's just $5 on your first bet. And if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we're talking about these Falcons rookies, pass rushers, and recently CBS Sports' Jared Dubin was breaking down, again, still in list season, guys, but he was breaking down the most important non-quarterback for every NFL team across the league and selecting a player that would take their team the furthest that is not a quarterback, right? That will be the most impactful factor for those team success. And the Falcons, he selected a pair of first-round pass rushers in Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., and he wrote that the Falcons haven't had a good pass rush since approximately 1952, and they weren't even founded until 1966. It's unfair to put the burden of years of failure on a pair of rookies, but the Falcons invested so much in them that it almost has to work out right away for the investment to pay off. So despite all that shade that Jared threw at the Atlanta Falcons' historic pass rush, D-Led, how much of a burden do you think it is fair to put on the pair of Falcons rookie pass rushers to provide that pass rush?
Well, I think, historically, it's unfair because historically, pass rushers don't come in the league and set it on fire. J.J. Watt had 5 sacks his rookie year. I think his brother had 7. Just going back to 82 when we started counting sacks. The leader is Javon Curse. He's the outlier at 14.5 with Tennessee that year. So the pass rushers don't come in and light it up. They're going, in Pierce's case, a 245-pound guy going against 300-pound grown men. He's going to win some, but he's going to lose some there. Jalen Walker's really he lasted to 15 because he's 6'1". So, can they get their arms into him? Do you send him from the linebacker spot? So yeah, it's unfair to have these grandiose expectations for what they're going to do based on the history. And also the fact that you got Leonard Floyd, so you don't have to rush one of them. You got Evan Cady, and Braylon Trice is coming off a knee. So you got some depth there, and and then I'm not even going to the depth of the roster, where you start getting down to Malone and some of those guys. I got Malone over here, Zach Harrison, I got him outside. I think Khalid Kareem is outside too. So you got some options there to slow roll it. Get them into some situations where they'll have a chance to be successful early and then build from there.
Now, Maria, when you look at, expectations for these rookies, as D-Led just laid out, historically, you do not have a ton of examples of guys that immediately lit the league up. You just saw last year's defensive rookie year in Jared Verse come in, very productive, generating pressure for the LA Rams last year with, a number that, relative to past guys is near the top of the league, but only 4.5 of those resulted in sacks for Jared Verse. Do you feel like it's fair to put those types of expectations on, the combination of Walker and Pearson? Do you feel like if those guys don't get off to the fastest of start, do the Falcons have enough of a pass rush with guys like Arnold Ebiketie and Leonard Floyd, as D-Led laid out, to be able to, tread water when it comes to having an effective pass rush?
The only really saving grace for those two, because they were drafted in the first round, there is pressure, as we've talked about ad nauseum. They both were picked in the first round, which means they expect them to have decent production. I'm not going to say save the entire defense themselves, but they expect them to have an impact this year. What's the saving grace is what D-Led's kind of laying out. For the first time in a really long time, there's depth at the edge rusher position for the Falcons. I can't even believe that we're talking about guys that are an option for edge rushers for the Falcons. And this is a team that for the last 3 of the last 6 seasons, they finished 30th or worst in total sacks in the NFL. The pressure has just not been there. And even just with that tiny stat, it goes way beyond that. I mean, the shade that they threw out before the Falcons were even founded, they could not get after the quarterback. I understand, because it's been frustrating, obviously, for Falcons fans. I don't think that the entire resurgence of the defense has to fall on those two guys' shoulders. However, I do believe that they are expected to go out and make somewhat of an immediate impact. That doesn't look like changing the entire trajectory of where we believe this Falcons defense could be headed. But I do believe that both of those guys are going to have an insane amount of pressure to get after the quarterback this year. And both of them understand that. I mean, every time that we've talked to them so far, which hasn't been very many, I think it's just been a couple of times since we've seen them before training camp, they know that that's the goal. They know that that's what they're there to do. But I wouldn't expect either one of them to be two people that completely change the fact that this Falcons defense has just been depleted over the last better part of the decade. I'll be next there. And so I do believe that they will make an impact. I think I've said that multiple times. I even put James Pierce Jr. as my rookie to watch out for this year a couple episodes ago. But again, they're not going to change this defense single-handedly. There's also changeover in the coaching staff and philosophy and what that means. They have a new defensive coordinator yet again in Jeff Ulbrich. So things are going to look a little bit different. Who knows what Braylon Trice looks like? We hope that he is what the Falcons believed when they picked him 2 years ago. But Who knows? We didn't see him at all last year. So there's a lot of question marks there that I think we're going to get answered for sure somewhat in training camp. But these guys aren't going to save the defense on their own. They're going to need a lot of help, and depth is on their side this year for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing I sort of take away with guys like AK and Floyd. And, we'll see what Walker and Pierce are once they get on the field in training camp, and then how they perform when we get to the regular season. And so I think they do have an opportunity that they don't have to come in right away. And we're expecting them in week one, even with Tristan Wirfs out of the lineup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that, they have to get 3 sacks each in that game in order to justify their draft selection in this Falcons defense. So we'll see what those guys can do as they develop over the course of a season. But, in talking about, what's the most important factor, X factors for this team's success? Obviously, the quarterback and Michael Penix is the number one factor. But as CBS Sports is writing, let's talk about the non-quarterback factors. Do you feel like, Maria, this team's success, that second most important X factor is the pass rush, or is there another player or position group or unit that you feel like is even more important than some of these young pass rushers emerging early on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the pass rush is a focus. It's all we could talk about last year when they couldn't get after the quarterback. And so it's going to continue to be that. I think that is one of the more obvious choices aside from what Michael Penix Jr. turns into, right? But one thing that I think is really going to be dependent on the way that this offense works is Bijan Robinson. Seems like very, very obvious, a very obvious answer. But even in talking to him, he is fully prepared and under the belief that he's going to have a monster season. And we talked about the Falcons are going to have to pay him a lot of money within the next few years. I think that he has goals higher than anything we've seen from Bijan before. He's continued to develop into this player that we already knew he's amazing. He wouldn't be drafted as high as he was as a running back if he wasn't, but he's turned into an everything kind of guy. He's not just one-dimensional as a running back, and you're going to continue to see him work towards a Saquon Barkley type season, a Derrick Henry type season. And having consistency at quarterback, I actually think can help Bijan a lot. So in order, I think probably the defense is my number one. Quarterback, perhaps number 2. And then I'm going to go Bijan Robinson as somebody that is going to have a monster season this year.
For you, D-Led, would you agree with Maria's order in terms of importance? Would you reshuffle it? Would you insert another player or position group in terms of what's most important for the Falcons to achieve success in 2025?
Yeah, those are all on point for sure. But I'll just add that I think one player on the defensive side of the ball, Ruka, if he can step up and take Grady Jarrett's place and help to solidify the interior of that defense, that's going to be very key. Because right now, if you look at that defense, it's like, I could run on them. But the interior doesn't look very strong. But if he could help to solidify that, then that's going to allow the edges and all the other stuff to happen. So somebody's got to step forward next to David Onyemata, who's going to the last year of his deal. And Rooks looks like the best candidate. You got Tyquan Graham, who's been steady but not special. And then you got Brandon Dorless. So you got bodies now to at least step forward here and help solidify that interior of the defense.
Okay, well, I think Ruka is going to be important to see if he breaks out. And let's talk more about some potential breakout candidates for this Falcons team as we run it back. So we're basically a week away from the start of Falcons training camp. And that means that, everybody's sort of planting their flag on who's going to be a breakout candidate this summer and this season. And so let's dive into that conversation. D-Led, you were just talking about Ruka and his potential to impact on the interior of the D-line. Who are some breakout candidates for you this upcoming season for the Falcons?
Yeah, Rook, and one we haven't discussed a lot. It was a kind of minor free agent signing, but Devon Diablo, the converted safety from Virginia Tech, if he could come in and play at a high level alongside Caden Ellis, that would be very beneficial to the defense and very important to their progression. He'd definitely be one. Xavier Watts back there on the back end, if he could earn that safety spot next to Jesse Bates, he'd be key too. So those are three guys that could break out and really help the defense.
Now, Maria, we're talking about potential breakout candidates, and it feels like most of the picks are going to be on the defensive side of the ball, because, I think we look at the offense as a little bit more solidified. But I'm curious, when you're thinking about breakout candidates, do you sort of see the sort of conventional wisdom of like, yeah, we need some of these young players on the defensive side of the ball to break out because that's been a sore spot for the team? Or, are there a couple of offensive players, obviously beyond Michael Penix, that you're expecting to sort of break out this season?
Yeah, I mean, we can name a whole plethora of guys on the defensive side of the ball that we need to step up, right? And I think D-Line mentioned pretty much everyone that I'm thinking of, and Nate Ollie has big plans for Ruggiero. So I am very excited to see what he looks like, especially in training camp. But as I mentioned before, Bijan Robinson, which seems obvious, but kind of not, just because he's had consistently good seasons since he's been with the Falcons, doesn't mean that can always be the case. Although it's Bijan, I think he's like a once-in-a-lifetime player. So I do believe he's going to have a monster season. And then there's a lot of focus and attention on Kyle Pitts. I know we talk about it a lot, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up again. He was absent during these workouts because he was dealing with, I think, if I remember correctly, that foot injury, right? And so Kyle has underperformed, as we have illustrated numerous times on this podcast, since his time in a Falcons uniform. And there's a lot of pressure on Kyle to be what they drafted him to be. Highest drafted tight end ever. He has all the tools and the intangibles to be this breakout, insane player. And every time you talk to Zach Robinson about him, every time you talk to Kevin about him, they think that he's going to have another transformative season. There are no signs to me that indicate that that may be the case. I hope I'm wrong. But I think there is still a lot of pressure on Kyle, whether or not he's going to be here in Atlanta or wants to go somewhere else. He does have to put on a little bit of a better performance than he has in the last few years. And I know we've talked so much about the pressure on Kyle in general. He just hasn't delivered what we have illustrated Kyle to be in terms of a tight end. So Kyle would be one of those. Naturally, I feel like year in and year out, I'm saying the same thing about Kyle. He needs to step up. He needs to step up. So for me, yeah, Michael Penix is obviously the super obvious one. We got 3 games out of him, and he looked good in moments, and he's looked great in moments during training camp and in the times that we've seen him running with the ones. But really, it's not big enough of a sample size for us to say this is the next quarterback for the next 10 years. We don't have that yet. And so for me, those 3 guys are really the ones I'm looking at. Although you're right, Aaron, the offensive side of the ball is definitely more solidified. Defensive side of the ball, I feel like that's all we're going to talk about in training camp. There's so many question marks, so many what the heck is it going to look like over there. So, and there's only one new piece to the puzzle on the offensive line. It's kind of boring just because there has been so much consistency there. So those are my big things on the offensive side of the football, although I do believe that the focus really is on what the heck this defense is going to look like.
Yeah, starting with Kyle Pitts, that is the big question. I'm rooting for Kyle to at least go out with a bang here in Atlanta, because I do not expect him to be back in Atlanta in 2026, given all the ups and downs and all the inconsistencies. And even if he does have that sort of, is it fair to call it a breakout year since he had a 1,000-yard rookie season and was a Pro Bowler? Probably not, but a re-breakout, I guess you could say, in terms of giving this team, production, maybe not quite to that level, but production where you feel like he's an integrated piece of the offense and maybe not as much of an afterthought. And I think some of that is owed on, getting more usage out of the tight end position in the play action passing game from Zach Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator. But you also need, when Kyle Pitts does get those opportunities, to take advantage of those opportunities, particularly in the red zone, which we haven't seen consistently be a threat in his 4 years so far in Atlanta, which was something that he was known to do at a high level at Florida. And that just hasn't really translated at the next level. And you hope that, in this one potentially final opportunity that he has, that we will finally see that come to the fruition. But I think when you think about this team in terms of, yes, obviously you need a lot more from the sort of unproven side of the ball and the defense. And so there's a lot more opportunities for guys to break out just because, outside of AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates and Caden Ellis, there aren't really anybody that you can point to on that defensive side of the ball that is a proven commodity. You could maybe throw David Onyemata in the mix, but you wonder sort of how much is left in the tank with him at this point in time. And so there are a lot of young players. But, I'm going to keep it on the offensive side of the ball when thinking about breakout candidates beyond just Kyle Pitts and the ones that you named, Maria. I think when you look at this team and how it's constructed, like this team is going to go really far if their offense can live up to the hype. And obviously Michael Penix and Pitts and Bijan and Drake and all those guys are going to be an important part of that. But going back to a conversation we had earlier today with the offensive line, like I think there are two pieces on that offensive line that you would really like to see break out. We know what Jake Matthews is. We know what Chris Lindstrom is. We know what Caleb McGarry are at this point in their careers. And as D-Led pointed out, you're wondering a little bit sort of with the tackles, how much is left in the tank. But, you're seeing Matthew Bergeron be this ascending player. And I would like to see him kind of, solidify. I've seen some, rankings and lists that say him and Chris Lindstrom form the best guard duo in the NFL. But it feels like Chris Lindstrom's doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to that conversation of who's the best guard duo in the NFL. And I would like to see, I don't need Matthew Bergeron to play at a Pro Bowl level or an all-pro level like Chris Lindstrom, but I would like to see him, carry a little bit more of that burden of being like, yes, he's also a really good guard too. That's not just necessarily living in Chris Lindstrom's shadow. And I think, Maria, you nailed it with Ryan Nuzzo being that sort of unknown on the offensive line. We saw the last couple of years, Drew Dahlman, despite some of the injuries he's been dealing with, that has caused him to miss time and given Nuzzo opportunities. But when he's been healthy, Dahlman, that is, he was very effective in how this team wants to play, being a core part of that run game, that run first identity for this team. And I think that's an open question mark, whether or not Ryan Nuzzo can be that same guy. And again, does he have to be as good as Drew Dahlman? I don't know. But at the same time, like, you got to be something closer to Drew Dahlman, I think, than what Nuzzo has been up to this point, which is he's a really good backup at this point, that when they've needed it to call on him to step in for Drew Dahlman, he's been available to step in there and sort of plug that hole. But I would like it to be more than just, oh, he's plugging a hole. I would like to see him be more of that guy that's kind of part of that engine that makes this offensive line grow. So I do think when we talk about the offense, that offensive line component is going to be important in addition to all the sort of skill position players. But D-Led, I want to turn it back to you. Do you see any of those breakout candidates on the offensive side of the ball? And how much do you sort of look at this offense in terms of being the engine behind this team's success this year?
Yeah, definitely see some additional breakouts. Good points about Kyle Pitts from Maria. Consistency was what Coach Kevin kept saying to Maria in his interview with him. He's got to be consistent. He told Maria, hey, he put it on tape. It's his fault. We've seen him do it. So now we want to do, our coach is the same. Once you see some guy do it, hey, do it again and over and over and over, rinse and repeat. And Kyle hasn't been able to sustain the high level of play. It's frustrating to them. They're, trying to make Terry's first and Arthur Smith's first pick a success. But, I can see a scenario where they got to try to get him going early. And by the trade deadline, you already kind of know whether you need to try to move him and get something or just let him play it out and get nothing altogether, because you're not going to franchise him at $16 million. But, yeah, certainly the line, Bergeron, good point there. My problem, and this is a group thing offensively, it was the Kansas City game. You needed 1 yard. You needed 1 yard, and you couldn't get it. And I'm not talking about running a jet sweep or going 5 wides and going empty. Mike Smith used to say, if we can't get a yard, then what are we doing playing football? So I need to see some short yardage and some power put into this offense. You don't have a fullback on the roster, so I don't care. Put Charlie back there and let him lead Bijan up in the hole. But, when you can't get a yard, that's a little bit frustrating. In the Kansas City game, Nick Bolton just came right through. I think Algier missed the block. I'm not sure. Keith Smith got at me and said I had that diagnosed wrong. But, that's fine, whatever. They didn't get the yard. So that's that I get mad when they get in shotgun on the 1 yard line too. So I'm like, hey man, all this 5 wides, all these pretty boys out there running these routes and stuff. Some point you gotta line up and knock the guy off. I don't care if it's a tush push or I'll just run a quarterback. I just call it the quarterback sneak. You gotta get the yard. And so that's something that they gotta add. They gotta add a power component to this offense. I love all the razzle dazzle and Mooney and his spin routes and all that good stuff. But I mean, when you needed a yard last year against the defending Super Bowl champs, you couldn't get it. So I'm hoping that they come up with maybe that's running behind Bergeron now. They've been trying to run behind Lindstrom and McGarry when they need that yard. But, I mean, you might want to put some power back in there to lead the backup in there. But that's one of the things that I think they got to add. Short yardage, power, I don't know where it's coming from because they're not constructed running a pistol to get that yard when it's time. So I don't know. You put have Drake on a crackback. I don't know. Come up with something. They got a lot of creative minds over there and ways to get guys open and get guys the ball on the move. But to cap that off, 3rd and 9. You get 9 yards and it's 4th and 1. You gotta get that one, keep that drive going. So that's one little fine point. Certainly Kyle's got to come. That's a good point on Bergeron and Algier. I did the breakdown on Montgomery and Gibbs up in Detroit, and it's close. But I know this is blasphemous, but some of Bijan's carries need to go to Algier. He had 305 last year. Jamar Gibbs did his damage in 250. So he was fresher. And Montgomery had about 30 more carries than Algier, 160 to 137, I believe. But he had like 9 touchdowns. So he was their power guy. He got it done in those short yardage situations near the goal line. So Algier is motivated. It's his 5th year. He's going to be a free agent. You can't pay him. So I'm thinking, his yards after the contact and in the goal line area, that's your guy. And Bijan probably be mad and miss some touchdowns there. But Tyler will get paid, and it'll be, a good, better split. You can't keep giving Bijan 304 carries. I'm sorry, that's too much. We can go back to the Michael Turner days where you can predict the burnout after so many years of 300 carries. So that's one thing. That's not going to be very popular, and nobody's going to say that. But if it happens that way, you heard it here first.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you, D-Led, for mentioning the fullback position and how it could be so much more effective with this offense without me having to do that on this show, as I often am doing that. But Maria, when we're talking about, the offensive line or the run game or whatever, again, we focus so much on, the passing game and, is Kyle Pitts going to re-break out? Is Drake London going to take that step? Where's Darnell Mooney's role in this offense? With this team, with a young quarterback, it does feel like the run game is going to be very important. I think D-Led nails it where there were too many times last year. You look at not only that Chiefs game, but you look at the previous week against the Eagles. The Falcons did ultimately win that game, but in the 4th quarter, there was a 4th and 1 conversion that they could not get. They gave the ball back to the Eagles, and fortunately, Saquon Barkley dropped a pass that probably would have sealed away that win. And the Falcons took advantage of that opportunity going down the field, throwing the football with Kirk to Darnell Mooney and winning that game. But there were too many instances last year where the Falcons needed to get a yard and they couldn't get a yard. What are your thoughts on that? And do you feel like that's going to be a problem that's going to get fixed this year?
Yeah, I feel like in the past, and I saw someone mentioning in the comments too, there have been red zone issues, which is true for the Falcons over the last couple of years, really. But especially in short yardage situations, the Falcons try to get a little too cute sometimes. And that was more of an issue with Arthur Smith. Not that we've had that big of a sample size with Ross so far, but in short yardage, All you need, as D-Led is saying, is 1 yard. Just get it there. Just get the ball over the yard line, and then you're good. And the creativity is great, but when it comes in these situations where all you need is, let's say, 1, 2, 3 yards, you don't really need to do anything super fancy unless the situation calls for it. And I felt like most times with the Falcons offensively in short yardage, it didn't. And so you just need to be able to get somebody to get you that extra yard. And Charlie Warner was a really good point. You know, he was such an underrated asset to this offense last year. And I feel like that's going to continue to be the narrative for him as well. You need him in those short yardage situations. He is a blocking machine. Charlie is insane. He did so much that goes unrecognized. And I feel like if they continue to utilize players like Charlie, that'll really help. But in those short yardage situations, I don't think that the Falcons have been able to show me enough to make me believe that they can fix it. But the run game is your friend when you got a young quarterback. And having to establish the run first and foremost is going to be so critical for this offense this year, especially with Michael as he's getting going early. I know he's made these things. He's not a guy that makes like these big proclamations, right? Like, we're going to go here. We're going to go to the Super Bowl. He doesn't do that. Even when he was talking about Drake London and he said, like, y'all gonna see that he is just going to be this breakout player. It's kind of, he left it at that. He was like, I'm not going to say anything else. So he's not a guy that makes these big promises or big proclamations, which is very smart because we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to play out with Michael, although he does have the confidence that this offense is going to be a well-oiled machine and roll in and all that stuff. But yeah, the run game is going to be so important for this team. It has had to be important in the past. They just haven't been able to do what they should have done in the run game. D-Line makes a very interesting point about the Tyler Algier Bijan Robinson duo. And maybe that happens, you know, and I can say I heard it first from D-Line on this podcast if that does happen. But relying on the run, especially with Michael Penix just getting his feet under him in the league 3 games is not enough for me to feel comfortable with him going out there and orchestrating a transformative offense that we haven't seen, right? So, yeah, I think run first, and I don't know about the Tyler Bijan situation, but if D-Led's right, then I love it.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if I would want to give Bijan less carries, but I want to give Tyler Algier more carries, and you know, you can run the ball more if you have leads late in games, right? Like that's the thing. And so
which they never really did. I mean, for the majority of the season, their backs were against the wall. Think about how many games came down to the final quarter for the Falcons last year. They were, and it's the NFL. I mean, most games are not blowouts anyway, but still, particularly for the Falcons, it was always, why is this team putting us through this? You know, like, do I go down from the press box? Do they have it in the bag? No, we're possibly going to an overtime situation. And we talked about it, I think, last week too, Aaron, that a lot of it came down to special teams. And, you know, you're relying on somebody in the final minutes of the game to try to put the game away. So, yeah, I think that's a really important point too. They don't ever have the comfy lead. They don't ever really have the flexibility to do that. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's those situations when they are up in the fourth quarter, in the final 5 or 6 minutes where they can sort of salt away the game. Those to me are the perfect times for Tyler Algier to get the workload that D-Led is sort of talking about to increase his impact on this offense. And we're talking about, you know, does that translate to the red zone? And, you know, maybe the thing that will help this team be better in the red area of the field is if they're wearing red helmets. And since we have D. Orlando Ledbetter here, we got to talk about the Falcons wearing red helmets in the look ahead to wrap up today's show. So the Falcons announced that they're going to don their throwback uniforms this season with the red helmets 3 times this year. Monday night against the Buffalo Bills in week 6, on the road against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Thursday night in week 15, and then finally on their second Monday night matchup against the Rams in week 17. The Falcons were 3-0 last year when they were rocking the throwbacks, and they've sported a 13-3 record since 2009 while wearing the throwbacks. D-Led, as the most vocal critic of the Falcons wearing the red helmets, does this recent success soften your stance about the team potentially wearing them more in the future? where are you at in 2025 with the Falcons and red helmets?
The red helmet should be banned. The Falcons wore those helmets, and the people that have been here since the beginning. I started watching football in 69, 70. So the Falcons in red helmets give you nightmares. They couldn't win. They never had a winning season until the 70s. Barkowski looked good in 80 doing it, everything, but it was torture. I mean, they had a defense the one year. I mean, I remember when Art Malone got his first 1,000 yards. All I remember is Jerry Rice just running up and down the field. The Rams beating them in the old AFC West. My cousin here, Laren Jackson, he played for the Falcons in 72, so I was traumatized by him out there in his red helmet, getting beat on a regular basis. He started with the Broncos and got traded. He was a union guy, and John Ralston didn't like it, so he got traded. They sent him to the Falcons to finish up his career. So for us, for the old folks, the red helmets bring on nothing but defeat. I understand the young kids think they look cool and all that, but yeah, when I see the red helmets, I see a lot of L's in your future. Now, I believe those numbers have been cooked. Recent wins, they've cooked the books on those things. Scheduling the red helmets against teams that they're going to win. But, if you got a throwback uniform that you won a championship with, you should wear that. But if you got a throwback uniform where you've been getting your heads beat in with, you probably shouldn't wear that. So that's my reasoning and rationale when you see me go into conniption fits about the red helmets. But I'm going to turn over a new leaf this season. I'm going to try to be open to the red helmets. Okay. And we're going to try to move forward that way and let the history stay in the history and move forward with the red helmets having a future.
Okay. Well, that's an exclusive here for Locked On Sports Atlanta, the Atlanta Football Party, that D-Led is willing to be open to the possibility of the red helmets. I didn't realize, D-Led, that this was a deep-seated family trauma for you, given your.
That's what he went to go get. He went to go get that picture when you didn't see him in the beginning.
Yeah. So I now it makes a little bit more sense. And you're right. Like this year, kind of we'll test that because they got the Bills, they got the Rams, they got the Bucks this year. Those are not, if you're talking about cooking the books, like those are probably games that I think that if we're looking at like FanDuel sports,
the red helmets for them games.
Yeah, like I
wear
don't think
the
they'll be
98 uniforms. Wear the 2016 uniforms. Don't wear the red helmet uniforms. No.
Okay. So Maria, I'm curious. Now that D-Led has explained all the trauma behind the red helmets, are you excited about the red helmets? I'm assuming that you probably have the opposite opinion of D-Led when it comes to the red helmets. Where do you sort of stand on the red helmets?
Sorry, D-Led, I'm obsessed with the red helmets, and I really cannot wait to see them rolled out. Now, when you very beautifully said all of your trauma, which I apologize for all the trauma, that sucks. So when you see those red helmets, you're thinking losses because you saw them firsthand, and I totally get that. So that I'm with. Like, I empathize. I get it. It's kind of like for the Georgia fans out there, when they roll out the black uniforms, like there is a lot of mixed feelings, even though I freaking love them. So the black jerseys I think are great for Georgia, and I wish they would wear them more. I don't know. I don't really associate it with that for the Falcons, obviously, because I wasn't watching games at that point. But I will say, every time I've seen them wear the red helmets, I've always said I think it's embarrassing to lose in them because they're so cool. So when you have them playing against the Bills in a red helmet, it's like that's a lot of pressure for me. But I really am obsessed with them. I think they're so great. They just look good, feel good. There's that old adage of you want to dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. And so maybe when they put on these red helmets, this is so not even logical at all, but I'm going to go there because I love the helmet so much. Maybe if they're wearing the helmets, it'll just be this, I don't know, resurgence of power or something. I think they're that cool. And I wish they could wear them all the time because I love them so much.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point, Maria, because like you have these 3 primetime games where they'll be wearing the red helmets and all eyes will sort of be on this team during those 2 Monday night games, and then late in the season, that Thursday night game potentially probably could be the game that decides whether or not, the Bucs or the Falcons win the division, given I think most people's expectations that those are the two teams that are in contention for the NFC South this upcoming season. And part of me kind of wonders, with all these eyeballs on the red helmets, is this a way for the Falcons to sort of gauge, I think, as Maria, you point out, most of the fans I talk to love the red helmets. D-Led is sort of on an island with by himself of absolutely despising the red helmet.
Why not make some good memories in the helmets, D-Led? You could have, what if this year there's some new resurgence of memories for you and you're like, wow, actually I love the red helmets.
Whew, that would come from way out of left field, but hey, power to
I'm trying to be positive.
Yeah, power to the people that have spoken. I'm on an island, but yeah, I mean, I can't erase the history. I remember Art Malone got over 1,000 yards, then they took it away, then they gave it back. I remember Clyde Humphrey doing his thing, Bubba Bean. It's just a lot. It was a lot. History there. The bad draft picks. Oh man. And then I was, I forgot about the history. 2009, that was the first time they got back-to-back winning seasons. So I was a beat writer, right after, they didn't go to playoffs the second year under Smitty, but they should have had a parade. And I think it was because they had moved away from the red helmets that they started to playing better and being a playoff team.
Sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
No, I think that's, talking about making good memories. I'm just wondering if the Falcons can find success with the red helmets this year against those opponents in those sort of critical games. Does that potentially lead to them going back to the red helmets in the future as a more permanent choice? Because I think the expectations from a lot of fans are that the Falcons may be changing their uniforms again in the near future. And I believe, obviously that's not going to be the case this year, but that possibly could be the case next year. And, obviously the red helmets are a polarizing conversation, at least on this show, maybe not elsewhere in Falcons fandom. But I'm curious, D-Led, if you could be on that advisory committee for what you would like to see the Falcons' next uniforms be, what sort of advice would you be giving to that committee?
They'll be in the black helmets. Only way you wear the red helmets is you win the Super Bowl in them. So win the Super Bowl, and whatever you win the Super Bowl in, that's the uniform. So
go ahead, D-Led, sorry.
Yeah, that's it. I might win the Super Bowl, and I'll be down with the red helmet. If you can win the Super Bowl, they need a Super Bowl here. The New Orleans even's got one. So the Lions are getting close. Man, they got the Browns are. I don't know what they're doing, but they can count their 11 AFLs and all their championships before they were called Super Bowls. So need to win a Super Bowl, and then I'll start worrying about the uniforms.
Yeah, I mean, D-Led has a point, Aaron, to a degree, but it is fun to think about the uniforms. If that's anything that we can get excited for with the Falcons, because last couple of years it's just been a lot of frustrations. And there are some fans that do agree with D-Led that there have just been too many losses. Who cares about the uniforms? Just win some football games, and that's all that matters. My dog clearly agrees. It's okay. My dog is he's going crazy. He wants to contribute to the conversation. But I just think that no harm, no foul. If we like the red helmets, then okay. But yes, I'm with you. Definitely we need to win some more football games in terms of the Falcons. And then I don't care what they wear. They can trot out there in a pink uniform for all I care. Once you win a Super Bowl, all bets are off.
Yeah, that party down Peachtree is gonna be lit.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah. I'm in that boat. I'm definitely in the boat. I don't care what they look like, what the uniforms look like, red helmets, black helmets, gray helmets, white helmets, whatever you want to wear, whatever you want to wear, just win some stinking football games. That's all I really ultimately care about. And so hopefully the Falcons will start doing that this upcoming season. And obviously D-Led and all the folks over at the AJC will be covering that all season long. And of course, with training camp a week away, they'll be covering that. And of course, We thank D-Led for being our guest today. And, of course, check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra, on Sunday on 11 Alive. And, of course, if you want to get more Falcons coverage, you can check out Locked On Falcons with your humble host, yours truly. That's going to be it for us today. We just have one more week until training camp kicks off. We will see you